What's up, hobby friends? In this video, I'm going to be showing you how I paint the metallics on Szerakh. Now, I'm going to be covering three different types of metallics in this video. There is the dark silver metallics and the gold, which I use on the attendants. And these are the same two recipes, the silver and the gold, I use on the rest of my Necron army. I'm also going to show you how I paint the more polished silver on Szerakh, which is nuanced with a bit of green and pink. That's used only on Szerakh himself to make him stand out. In order to make these videos as informative as possible, I have included as much of the painting process as necessary. However, in the interest of cutting down on the video time and length, I have chosen to speed up these parts. If you want to skip these parts and just jump to the next step, you can use the timestamp links in the video description below. So to paint the black metal on my Necrons is actually a fairly simple and straightforward recipe. Now we're going to need 4 colors to pull off this color. And we're going to be using Scale Colors Black Metal as our base coat. And then we're going to highlight this with Scale Colors Heavy Metal. The label's a bit worn out, but this is their heavy metal color. This is a very nice, deep, dark metallic color that forms sort of the core or the main color of the metal. And we use this color as our highlight very sparingly to add that bit of a pop. What we do is we then follow that up with a wash of Nuln Oil. Now, I don't wash over the entire surface of the model. I mainly pick out some of the crevices, the cracks where the armor plates meet, more just to define the shapes. Because I'm doing this by hand, I can be much neater in my application. I'm not going to be filling in these cracks, and so Nuln Oil is a very good strength of color for what I need. On my more generic rank and file models, my non-characters, my basic infantry, I will actually airbrush these colors on. And because the silver gets into all of the gaps, I need something a little stronger. And so instead of using a Nuln Oil, I'll use a black oil wash instead. But the basic premise is the same. It's a black wash to define some of the cracks, the crevices, the joints, and just to tidy up where we might have overpainted. Once that's done, we follow up with a final highlight, just a touch up of heavy metal, and then some very fine spot highlights with VMC Air Chrome. Now this color is very, very reflective. It's got a very high metallic pigment count to medium. And so we want to use this color sparingly. We're mainly focusing this on our top edges around the head, the upper torso, and then maybe lining some of the more raised edges on the top of the arms and legs. So to demonstrate this color scheme or this technique, I'm going to be painting his left arm. So we're going to start with our base coat of black metal. Now this color is fairly diluted out of the bottle and then combined with our wet palette. We're going to need to do a couple of thin coats to ensure a very nice, even coverage. Now you can see here that I'm being very, very careful to maintain the black in these crevices where the joints are, where the armor plates meet, where the damage is. The neater you are in this step, the easier our black wash is to achieve. It also means that you'll have more definition in the model, and it'll just look much more polished. So you can see even with the simple base coat of the black metal, it's already starting to look very, very good. The color itself is dark, darker than JW's bolt gun metal, but because of its pigment quantity, the metallic flakes in the paint, they are very reflective and they're catching the light, and so it creates that nice, deep, rich metal look that we want. So we're going to follow this up with a highlight of heavy metal. And so our first step is to mix a 50-50 mix of black metal and heavy metal, and we're just going to create our initial or start to create our initial blends, and we're really focusing on one particular line or area where we want to catch the most reflection. So in this example, because my light source is going to be coming from this direction, I want my highlight to be focused on the top part of the forearm. Because of the way this upper arm, the bicep sort of flares out, we're going to catch the highlight near the bottom and then on the top ridge right here. And then similarly on the hands, it's mostly going to catch on the top of the arm or top of the hand and then on the tops of the knuckles. You want to be careful at this step not to go too overboard with your highlights. What's really going to create that super shiny reflective illusion is to have one spot that's really, really bright, and then letting the black metal do the rest of the work. And once that's done, we're going to follow that up with a highlight of pure heavy metal. And once again, we're just concentrating on these select spots that we've chosen to highlight. And we're just going to be very, very limited in how we apply it. As we apply them, we're just slowly dotting and pulling the color out to create a smoother transition. Almost a little like glazing, but not quite. And with our highlights done, now it's time to apply our wash. So we're just going to take our Nuln Oil straight out of the pot, and we're just going to be focusing on refining or touching up some of these dark areas. So like in the elbow joints, in the shoulder, the shoulder socket, and then in the fingers. Now, because I was very neat in painting the metal base coat and highlights, my black wash step is very simple. There's not a whole lot to do. I'm really just touching up and refining some points that I want to be a little darker. Now, once that's dry, we're going to go again with our heavy metal, and we're just going to touch up some of these highlight spots. If you got any of the Nuln Oil wash on the silver, it will knock back some of the strength, and so this highlight step just allows us to bring back some of those brighter points. Now at this step, we can now apply our final highlight of Vallejo Air Chrome. And what we're looking to do is we're just looking to focus on the super bright points. You're going to see that as I apply this color, it's very strong. You apply too much and you end up brightening the entire thing too much. So really we're just focusing on some of the sharpest edges and corners, taking care not to go too overboard with this step. And that's it. Very simple, very straightforward, but also very effective. We're just going to repeat that over the entire model, and the silver's done. So some of my characters and my more elite units will have some of their runes and the more ornate parts picked out in gold as opposed to silver. And I find that this is a nice way to just add a little bit of detail and extra attention, or draws a little bit of extra attention to some of my more elite models and to make them stand out from the regular infantry. Another goal is just to create a hierarchy within the royalty or the the social structure, I guess, of my Necron army. So you can see here on the attendants, I've painted his collar and his glyph in gold. So to do this, we're going to need 4 colors. Our base coat is Scale Colors Negro Gold, and we highlight this with Elven Gold, also from Scale Color. We're going to follow this up with a Nuln Oil wash. And then for our highlights, we're going to mix in a bit of Vallejo Air Chrome into our Elven Gold. Now, once again, because this is a very reflective color and it's very strong on the silver, we only need a little bit. The key thing to ensure when we get to this highlight step, and I will cover this when I actually apply it to the model, we want just a little bit to tint the gold. We want the overall look to still be gold in the end and not silver. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to base coat with our Negro Gold. Much like when we're painting our silver, the neater you are at this step, the easier it is for our black wash and the less cleanup we have to do afterwards. So it's worth spending a little bit of time using a fine detail brush to just be careful when you're applying this gold. And then to do our highlights, we're going to use Elven Gold. If I was painting a piece of armor or a flat surface, I would want to mix in a bit of the Negro Gold and create a smoother transition. But because I'm just highlighting raised runes and glyph elements, I'm just going straight to the Elven Gold. And as I apply it, I'm just pulling my brush down, and as there's less and less pigment, it creates a nicer, smoother transition. And with that step done, we're going to apply our Nuln Oil wash. I'm just going to liberally apply it, particularly in the collar. The runes are a little messier because they're so soft in how they're raised details. A little tricky to paint, so I'm just using the oil wash to define and correct my mistakes. I'm going to let that dry, and then we're going to apply our highlight. So once the Nuln Oil is dry, we go back in with first our Elven Gold to touch up some of our highlights. And then once that's done, we're going to mix in a small amount of Vallejo Air Chrome to brighten up our Elven Gold. Now we want to make sure that we're still keeping the color within the gold range and it's not more silver. And then we're lightly going to pick out some of the utmost raised points and edges. I want to be very careful at this step not to go too overboard with this color. Otherwise, I end up making the gold look like silver. So we're just focusing on a few key spots to give the illusion that it's catching the, or it's the brightest points. It's getting that like magic ping of color, a ping of light, while still maintaining the gold color of everything else. And that's really all I do for the metallics on my Necrons. So we're going to approach painting the armor on Szerakh in the same way that we painted the silver on the attendants. However, I'm going to add a little bit of color nuance into the armor, and we're going to use a couple of the Scale Color Metal Alchemy paints for this. And we're not looking to deviate too much from the black metal look that we have, but I do want to add a little bit of just a bit of extra oomph. And you can see that there's a touch of yellow, sort of this yellow gold color. And then there's a little bit of a pink sheen to it as well. I've also pushed the highlights with my Vallejo Air Chrome a little higher. And instead of using Nuln Oil to shade the model, I'm going to be using black oil paint. Now, functionally, they're about the same. The added benefit of using an oil paint is I can be a little neater with the wash. It flows more easily than Nuln Oil, and I can use clean mineral spirits afterwards to clean up without having to repaint any of this armor nuance afterwards. So to do this, I'm going to be demonstrating this on his left leg. Or I guess from our point of view, it's the left leg, it's his right leg. Much like we're painting the attendants armor or the silver on the attendants, we're going to be using Scale Colors Black Metal as our base coat. And then what we're going to be doing is before we proceed to our highlighting step, we're going to be mixing in either the Peridot Alchemy from Scale 75, as well as the Kunzite Alchemy into our black metal, and that'll add our color nuance. And then to proceed with our highlights, we're going to highlight as normal, like we did with our attendants. We're going to be using black metal and heavy metal. And then we're going to polish up with Vallejo Air Chrome. And then, as I mentioned before, we're going to be using a wash of just black oil paint with mineral spirits as opposed to Nuln Oil to define the recesses and the joints. Now, of course, because we're going to be painting very neatly with our brush, we're going to try and maintain these crevices to begin with. The oil paint is more just like an extra redundant step. We're going to do our best to keep it clean to begin with to minimize the work that we have to do with our wash. One thing I do want to note is that I do varnish the army. I do dull coat it with purity seal, which has a dulling effect on the metals because it removes some of the shine. And while this is great for a tabletop miniature, it makes them very hardy and durable for gaming wise. So you can see on the dais that I have actually already dull coated this piece or this section of the model, and the metals, they're still shiny. They still maintain a bit of that reflectivity, and this is in large part due to the higher pigment count of the scale colors. And then Vallejo Air Chrome in the highlights, it punches past that dull coat and still maintains that bit of a shine to it. However, when you compare the two of them, you can already see that Szerakh is just that extra bit shinier because he's still unvarnished. What I'm actually going to do when I finish everything together, I'm actually not going to varnish Szerakh. I'm going to leave him unvarnished, and because I won't have that extra layer of the dull coat knocking back the metallics, he'll just pop a little bit more on the dais. And because he's going to be central in the dais, I'm not really going to be handling him. I'm not too worried about the durability of the model. One other thing when we're approaching highlighting and shading this model and applying our nuance, don't forget that Szerakh is engulfed in this cape. Okay, a lot of him, particularly in the back, is going to be hidden behind this cape. And so when you're applying your highlights, keep that in mind. We're really focusing on the front of the model. And then with the color nuance, we're not too worried about the back. No one's going to see this. So we're mainly focusing on the side and then a little bit on the front, just more so in the shadows. So starting with our black metal, we're just going to very neatly paint the base coat on the armor. So with the base coat of heavy metal done, now it's time to start applying our color nuance. Now we're going to be, again, using this with the alchemy colors from Scale Color, in particular the Peridot and the Kunzite. So we're going to start with the Peridot. We're just going to get a little bit of color on the palette, and we're going to be mixing just a touch of this with our heavy metal to do our first nuance, and then using that color pure. And then we'll repeat the process with the Kunzite. because I'm going to forget the names, I'm probably going to refer to this as the green alchemy and the pink alchemy. When we start approaching the highlighting on this model, it's useful to keep in mind how metal actually works and reflects on cylindrical surfaces. Now, I want this guy to be very, very reflective, not quite chrome, but I want him to be polished. And the way that metal cylinders tend to reflect light is in lines. They don't tend to behave like your typical cylinder. Like you sort of do. You get your bright points and your dark points following along the volume of the shape, but the metal or the metal surface tends to also create these lines of highlights and shadows that give metal objects a very unique um, look to them. And you can already kind of see on this model, just with the lights on my workspace, how the metallic legs or the metallic limbs are already creating those bands of color, right? We're getting some bright lines here, some bright lines there, a bit of dark there, almost as if it's like a non-metal contrast of bright and dark. And when we apply our highlights and shadows and with these color nuances, we want to be thinking in terms of these lines, right? So we're going to be applying these lines up down to help reinforce that shape. We're also going to be focusing most of our highlights on this front panel right here. We'll probably be doing two lines. Just add a little bit of extra detail instead of just one flat highlight. We're going to go 1 and 1. And then we'll probably add another subtle one just right back here, which means that we have all this space in the middle where we're going to be working in our color nuance. That's where our shadows are going to be. And rather than just have a flat silver or flat black metal, we want to add a bit of extra color. So we're taking a black metal, we're adding a bit of our green alchemy, and we're just going to lightly paint in a glazed line. And you can see that the alchemy color isn't very, very strong. When I first picked up these colors, I was kind of curious about them, but they didn't work quite as expected. I thought they would work like a typical metal color that you can paint on a flat primer or whatever, and they would coat very, very well. But they don't. They behave more like a glaze right out of the bottle. And they're really, really useful in tinting and modulating the color of an existing metallic. And I found that as I've been experimenting with them, that they're very, very nice at adding that subtle color and that depth to something that I've already painted. We're going to nuance a little bit of the green on the inside here. Again, we're thinking in terms of the up-down straight lines. And if you're unsure about how to apply this, I would recommend a quick Google search. References are an artist's best friend. And if you're unsure of how something should look, just look it up. I'm sure there's going to be tons of photos online that you can find and browse, and will serve as a good jumping point for how you want to paint your own model. On these round portions, we're focusing a bit of this green alchemy near the bottom, help to reinforce that curvature, that curve shape. And then on the sides of the feet, just a little bit. We don't want to tint the metal to be green, but we want to add that nuance. We want to add just a hint of extra color in there to create a little more visual interest. If I want to punch up the green a little bit more, I'll just take pure green alchemy and I'll do a stronger line. The trick is to be subtle with this, less is more. Once we're happy with that, we're going to be doing the exact same thing with our pink alchemy. A little bit on the palette. We're going to mix it with our heavy metal. And a useful place to put them is in between the green lines that we've painted. So if we're doing like, say, a brighter highlight here, green, green, a bright highlight, maybe we'll focus some pink in between the green here. And don't forget to follow the forms. So if you're going to paint a green line here, continue that line down the length of the leg. Keep it consistent to make it feel like these parts are receiving the same sort of lights and shadows from the same objects around them. I'm going to go stronger with the pink on the bottom edge of this curve, of this armor panel. This armor panel. And we'll do the same. We'll add a touch of pink on this inside edge. And with that color nuance done, we're then going to highlight the rest of the metal like we did the attendants. So first taking 50-50 black metal and heavy metal for our initial highlight, and we're going to work up to pure heavy metal. And then we're going to finalize our highlights with some Vallejo Air Chrome. Now, once again, I'm really focusing my highlights on this front portion of the leg, running down the length. If you can see from the side, it's got this nice curve to it, and it starts to flare out, which means that most of our highlights are going to concentrate on the top of the thigh. It'll catch a bit on the top of the knee and shin guard, and then we're going to get a bit of a pocket of shadow down here before the armor starts to flare out, and we receive much stronger highlights at the tops of the feet. Once again, I'm highlighting the thigh with 2 lines or 2 bands of highlights as opposed to one strong one, just to add a little bit of extra detailing in there. And if you need to correct, either a color nuance or you've gone too far on your highlight, just take black metal, work it back in. Nothing is set in stone, and because, especially with these alchemy paints, because they are very glaze-like, and they're very diluted, it's okay to go back in afterwards and just touch up. And just work the model, work the surface until you're happy with it. I want to put a band of highlight on this part of the leg as well. And I'm really just, I'm ignoring the back. The back of this model from this part downwards, I really don't care about because the cape hides it all. So this is just, as long as they're clean base coats, don't waste your time. Now this leg also flares out. It has this curve going down. So I'm also going to concentrate some extra highlights over here around the, what I think is an energy orb. I intend to paint that blue. So I'm just going to concentrate some highlights over there as well. And I'm being careful not to get paint into these runes, just to make it easier for my oil step. If I fill in too much paint into the runes, it'll make the oils, they're not going to flow as easily or as nicely, and I'll have to do a little more work to define them if I'm messy at this stage. So normally when I paint the silver on the rest of my Necrons, before I apply the final highlight with Nuln Air Chrome, I will usually do my wash step. Now, particularly with Nuln Oil, it's a little messier. It doesn't flow as well as black oil does, and usually it tends to dull some of those final highlights if it overpaints or slops over. So usually what I do is I do the black wash, let it dry, touch up the highlights with heavy metal, and then apply the final highlight with air chrome. I'm going to swap the two actually on this model in particular. I'm going to do the air chrome first and then hit it up with black oil paints. Because I've been very, very neat with my base coating and my highlighting, I've maintained pretty much all of the crevices I want to. All I'm doing with the black oil paint is just helping to add a little bit of extra definition and touch up just minor issues and mistakes. My oil paint's fairly diluted. It's very easy to erase, and so I'm not too worried about dulling down any of the air chrome. So this is really more just me speeding up the process rather than doing highlight, wash, extra highlights and touch-ups. I'm just doing all my highlights and then the wash, and then erasing if I have to, but if I'm neat enough, I really don't. So with the air chrome, apart from doing the edge highlights, we're going to focus some really um, strong lines right up top on the thigh, just to help reinforce those two highlights that we wanted to establish. It really just makes this spot pop. To create a bit of rim highlights, we're going to take heavy metal on the lower edges and add in a very subtle faint highlight. Once we're happy with all of our highlighting, we're going to finalize with the black oil wash. Now, I'm not going to bother gloss varnishing this model. I found that the metallic paints from Scale Color are um, they're very smooth compared to normal acrylics when you apply them, and they really do help, or they have lower surface tension, I found. Low enough that it's not a significant jump between just the flat acrylic and a coat of gloss varnish. So I'm just, again, skip that step, speed up my process a little bit, and I'm just going to dab some of this oil paint in there, letting capillary action do all the work for me. And that's it. We'll just repeat the process over the entire model and then paint the rest of them like we do the rest of our Necrons. So if you enjoyed the video, give it a like, and don't forget to check out the other videos in my Necron Szerakh series. Don't forget to subscribe for more awesome weekly content, and to check out my Instagram as John the Ho for daily updates on my hobby projects. Until next time, happy hobbying.